true story of the giant Goliath? Goliath was a feared warrior from Gath and served in the Philistine army. Many scholars believe he descended from the Rephaim, a people of great stature who inhabited the region of Ammon. Others suggest that Goliath might have been a descendant of the Anakim, also famous for their height. Goliath's height has always been a topic of debate, as the unit of measurement called a cubit varies depending on interpretation. The Hebrew text describes Goliath as being 6 cubits and a span, which would be approximately 10 feet and 6 inches tall. The epic battle between David and Goliath took place in the valley of Elah. Goliath, armed with a powerful sword and an imposing spear, was confident in his victory. He wore a bronze helmet and scale armor, and a shield bearer accompanied him. His size and equipment made him an almost unbeatable adversary. The duel between two warriors to decide the fate of an army was a common practice at the time. However, David's victory, a young shepherd over the giant with just a simple stone, showed that the strength of the God of Israel prevailed.
Isn't it amazing how many times the Bible can fail scientifically, and yet people still believe in these stories? And when we're talking about the David and Goliath story, the science that fails is the science of Goliath's height. Now, if you've heard me do other videos about Goliath and his height and the fact that he had probably acromegalia and that he was probably suffering from being nearsighted, had struggled with his movement, most of the time I use Andre the Giant in his latter age, in his 30s and 40s, to demonstrate how that can affect you. And Andre the Giant was at 7'4", and at 7'4", once he reached about late 30s and 40s, he struggled to even move. If you ever watch WrestleMania 3, he wasn't carted out because of the prestige of it all. He was carted out because he couldn't walk that far. You see him belaboring constantly on the ropes because his body just was in so much pain. So in this David and Goliath story, if you were to give Goliath the measurements based on the Egyptian cubit, then Goliath would be about 6'6", and so the story could work. But according to the Masoretic text, according to the Septuagint and many other Aramaic texts, Goliath is somewhere between 9 foot 9 inches and the 10 feet 2-3 inches that this creator utilized. Now, here's the problem with that. Problem number one: the flood was supposed to wipe out all the giants, but apparently it didn't. And people like to use the fact and say that, well, the women of Noah's daughter-in-laws, they had the giant gene in them, and so it's their fault. Blame the woman again. The other problem is that it is an impossibility for a person who is standing 9 feet or 10 feet tall to be a warrior, carry around that weight, and be sustainable in battle. And we know that humans have grown taller over the ages. So David was more than likely about 5'4". So if he was 6'6", he would appear to be a giant. But David was about 5'4", somewhere in that realm, 5'6". So it wasn't a very tall man in itself. It is believed that Saul was about 6 foot, and he was considered to be a very tall person in their time frame. So David was probably about 5'6". Now here's the problem when we look at giants of today. So this is currently I believe he's still currently the tallest man in the world. And as you see, he is merely in his 20s, and yet he needs crutches to be able to walk and hold himself up, because the human body is not built, the skeletal system is not built to sustain a person who is pretty much over about 7 feet 5, 7, 10, 7, 11. This is why, even though I'm in San Antonio now and I like Wimbiana, if you put more muscle on Wimby, you are adding too much to his bone structure, and his bones will break. It's kind of like when y'all are eating a drumstick and you see that bone that's broken in the drumstick and the leg is already broken. That's because the steroids added too much weight to the chicken. The chicken couldn't stand, so its legs broke. So you eating steroided up chicken. It's just a little extra right there, just a little extra. But In general, the human body cannot support weight, a person of normal weight that would be over in those 7 foot, 8 foot, 9 foot realms. So if a person who is only 8'1" is requiring crutches in his 20s to be able to walk because his bones cannot handle, and he's not big, he's little, not warrior big. You gotta think about the weight of this armor that they was talking about, the shield and the helmet and the spear that Goliath was supposedly carrying. This guy is skinny. He couldn't carry all of that. You put all that armor on him and all them bones is breaking. So, if you can't do it with an 8 foot guy, how in the hell are you gonna do it with Goliath? This gentleman, Woodrow, I believe he was about 8'3", something around that nature. He died in 1948 at the age of 22. He died of complications with his foot being infected because of the weight to which he was carrying. Oftentimes, in almost every picture, he disguises his issues by leaning on people or leaning on a vehicle. But when he doesn't have that option, you'll find that he used a cane. So he was a teenager. For those who will say, well, Goliath might have been fighting when he was a teenager. This guy, definitely much thicker than the previous gentleman, the current world record holder, still had to use a cane to support his body because his bones couldn't do it. So what does this mean? This means that the story of David and Goliath is hugely exaggerated over time. That Goliath may have been, if he was a warrior, then he may have been about 6'6", as the Egyptian cubit would put him at. I believe it's the Egyptian cubit would put him at 6'6". But he would have been around 6'6" at that time frame, which 6'6" fighting a 5'4" would be a giant and plausible. But as the story expanded itself and went over generations and centuries go by, the legendizing of the story happens, and now he's 9 feet. Then he's 10 feet. So he becomes bigger and bigger, but science dictates that there's an impossibility for him to have been as big as they claim, and to be a warrior, and to live as long as he did naturally. So, if the Bible is the inspired word of God, two problems. If the Bible is the inspired word of God, then how are men able to exaggerate the stories of it? If not one jot nor tittle shall ever be taken away from it, how can man then expand on it if you can't add or take away from the Bible? Two, it demonstrates how stories may have been rooted in something legitimate, something real, but then as time goes on, the stories become legendized, and this story becomes a big fish story, much like I have said about your Jesus story, how it may have been based on an individual person, but then over time he becomes legendized, and then like fools, people begin to worship him as a god. Think about it. The Trinity was not even fully received by those who believed in Christianity until after the Council of Nicaea. And then it was forced on people when Theodosius took over the Roman Empire in 381, 382. So, tell me again how all this Bible is real. It is not. But what do you guys think? Comment, like, share, subscribe, and always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.